Man, have I procrastinated on this video. What's up everyone, the Sly and Sonic fan here. Let's talk about Sonic Omens. A subject many can agree, for better or for worse, it's an interesting one to delve into. Previously titled Sonic 2020 and developed by the formerly named Mania team, this fan game took the community by storm, and rightfully so. There exists a wide variety of creative and immensely talented fan projects for the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, but arguably none of them could quite match the sheer amount of promise that Sonic 2020 seemingly had in store. Its scope, its visuals, everyone agreed it looked fantastic. Sadly though, like most things in this community, it didn't stay sunshine and rainbows for very long. As the game ventured further in development, accessible betas rolled out, and the title changed to the current Sonic Omens, with the dev team now going by Our Ouroboros Studio, and many people began to see this project in a more negative light. First of all, opinions of the game itself range from slightly underwhelming to downright unplayable, with some even claiming it played like garbage. And secondly, the thing that really killed the game, the endless onslaught of controversies. The drama of the behind the scenes of this game remained the #1 discussion in the Sonic community, and as word of mouth spread, one by one, more and more people turned on Omens and effectively disowned it, with many big Sonic tubers even going as far as to avoid playing it. It got so bad that even though I knew absolutely nothing about this game back in 2021, it was made very clear that Omens was to be stayed away from. For the longest time, it was just common knowledge that the game was awful and the devs were horrible people. At least that's what I was led to believe at first. But everything changed once I finally got my hands on a gaming laptop a couple of weeks ago, and my curiosity got the better of me. What was really the deal of Sonic Omens? I heard everyone's general consensus, but what's the actual full story? Well, I sat down and watched the Sonic Show's video on the matter, congratulations by the way Jaden, and looked into the situation more. But most importantly, I sat down and experienced all of what Sonic Omens had to offer. I beat the main story, I got every S rank, and I collected all 65 red rings. And wow. Honestly, I'm speechless. Sonic Omens is one of the best Sonic games I've ever played. How's that for a dramatic hook to draw your attention? Honestly, I think all that achieved was getting some instant dislikes, but I'll take that chance. Because yes, while it's not objectively flawless and it is a fan-made project crafted with obvious limitations, Sonic Omens is everything I want from a Sonic game compiled into one singular experience, and I'm head over heels for it. As for the drama, I won't address it right away because there's a lot I want to say on that front, but some of you may be aware that even if something is good, I won't support it over any circumstances if the creator or creators are awful people and or have done some awful things. So you know that I wouldn't be here risking my legitimacy as a creator if I didn't genuinely believe that all the behind the scenes issues people are pissed about are all blown way the fuck out of proportion, with loads of misinformation I'll delve into. As I said earlier, I definitely procrastinated on making this video, and now I realize the reason for that isn't simply because I'm super lazy. Even though that's definitely part of it. No, the main reason is because I know how vicious the Sonic community can be, especially regarding the mere mention of this game. The Sonic Show's video that I mentioned earlier got torn apart by the community, and his is one of the only videos defending this game that exist on the platform. Don't get me wrong, there is a side to the Sonic community that I love, and sometimes it can be a positive fandom. But like most fandoms, a good portion of it are tweet first and ask questions later, and because of that, there barely exists any room for nuanced conversations and free thinking. So there's a good chance anything I have to say that wavers from the norm will be immediately dismissed. If you clicked on this video out of curiosity and you have a burning hatred for Omens, all I ask you to do is listen to what I have to say with an open mind. If that doesn't work for you, well, feel free to click off because this is my review and my opinion. With that said, let me take on the daunting task of accurately expressing my clear, very much biased thoughts on Sonic Omens. The first thing we're going to tackle is the visuals, and I don't need to say much. I mean, have you looked at the screen? Look, my PC is alright, but it cannot handle running Omens at full resolution with 60 frames while being screen captured. But even with the compressed footage on screen, you can tell that this game has no right looking as good as it does for a fan-made project. Not only are the 3D renders and textures so crystal clear and well made, but there is a stunning amount of color here. But not in a blinding, obnoxious way, but more so like the type of art style you think of when Adventure 2 or Unleashed comes to mind. This game is really pretty to look at, and by extension, the well-crafted environments of each stage. Whether it be the tropical Chow paradise, a dark and high-tech gun facility, or the stormy white jungle, everything looks so good to the point where there's no clear distinction between the graphical fidelity of Omens and that of an 8th generation official release. Hour Over Bowls really took the unique art style the games are known for and applied it seamlessly here. While we're still on visuals, holy cow, these cutscenes. Yes, this fan-made game has fully animated and voiced 3D cutscenes that look stunning. The lighting is on point and used very effectively, the models have a surprisingly amount of expression and move around a lot, there's high-scale action, just look at them! No, seriously, look at them! How does something like this exist in a free-to-download fan game? These cutscenes look better than anything seen in an official game since Unleashed, and that's not a diss towards Sonic Team's efforts. I've been making a lot of comparisons between Omens and official Sonic games, and I want to make it crystal clear that I'm not trying to paint the recent games we've gotten in a negative light for the sole purpose of bringing Omens up. Frontiers is literally my favorite entry in the entire series, guys. There's a reason I'm as much of a Sonic fan as I am. Shocker, it's because I love the games, which were crafted with immense love and passion from everyone who worked on them. But the reason for the comparison is so I can try and convince you all just how good these cutscenes look, because I still can't get over them. We need cutscenes with this much personality and expression in a Frontier sequel because holy shit. However, one thing that many, including myself, saw as a huge con that undermines the cutscenes is the voice acting. If you would have asked my thoughts on the voice work for this game back when I first beat it, I would have told you that for the most part, it was pretty bad. But not due to the fault of certain performances, but for the fact that some of these voices sound absolutely nothing like the characters do in-game, with Eggman being the main example of this. You see, the person who voices Sonic does an uncanny Jason Griffith impression, and if this story's ties to Sonic X that I'll delve into later, it's reasonable to assume the devs wanted 4 kids sound-alikes. And with that in mind, a lot of these performances sound bizarrely inaccurate aside from Sonic and maybe Shadow, and I was left wondering why a game with such big production quality couldn't find more accurate impressionists. And then it hit me. Wait a minute, aren't these devs Russian? Then I went on YouTube to hear the Russian dub of Sonic X and Unleashed, which are the game's Omens draws direct parallels from, and holy shit, the mystery is solved.
Знаю того, кто может знать что-то о происходящем в последнее время.
My sensors picked up strange activity at an abandoned Eggman outpost not far from here.
Извини! Серьезно, извини! Пожалуйста, прости меня! Я больше не буду злодействовать! Обещаю!
Yeah! Only I am allowed to take over this planet! And I'm not going to let some third-rate villain take that away from me!
То есть, ты сейчас в своем истинном обличье, Соник?
I will always protect you.
I had a whole segment planned where I would go into why these voices don't sound too good and are pretty unnatural, but no, these are just simply how the Russian voices of the characters sound, which makes sense because most of the voice cast is Russian. Most except for, you guessed it, the voice of Sonic, who bases his performance off of Jason's, and Amy, who sounds like Amy normally does here in the US. All it took was putting 2 and 2 together to figure out why the voice acting in Omens was quote-unquote bad, when in reality, we just weren't used to hearing these voices for the characters. The only performance I can't fully take seriously is Shadow's, and that's because his Russian accent is so incredibly strong, it's a little funny.
This time, the doctor has bitten off more than he can chew. He's even managed to get to Julian's bedside.
But for the most part, the cast did a great job. The voice acting can definitely be shoddy in some places, but for a fan project, it's not too bad. Now let's talk about how well this game performs. When running the game at moderate resolution while using screen capture, I encountered a few occasional stutters and frame drops, but aside from that, everything ran pretty smoothly. I'll admit, it's a little hard determining if the game runs well because it really just depends on how powerful your computer is. I've seen people say the game is unoptimized and runs poorly, which I find a little hard to believe considering the huge amount of videos where people are running this game just fine, and in fact everything ran fine on my end as well. This is a 14GB game that requires 4 gigs of RAM and can be graphically demanding, so obviously if you try and run it on your dad's 2001 work computer, it won't perform too well. If you're having frame issues and lag, you can simply turn your resolution down so you can optimize the experience for your specific PC, which is what the devs literally tell you to do in the first cutscene. If you're wondering if the game is buggy, I have put a considerable amount of time into it and have only encountered 3 jarring glitches which had me go out of bounds. Aside from that, the game was considerably polished. On the build I played, there were some game-breaking bugs that prevented me from completing certain stages of alternate characters, but those have thankfully been patched in the recent 3.2.0 update, so that's all dandy. And finally, one last thing to close out this game's immaculate presentation, the fucking soundtrack. Composed by John Rise, a lot of the music you hear in this review is from the game's official soundtrack composed by him, and my god, what an artist. Omens OST, like everything else, mirrors what you would hear in an official release, and there are so many tracks in here that are outright addicting to listen to. The final boss is a fully composed vocal song titled The Weight of the World that brings back Bentley Jones, who's known for their performance in Dreams of Absolution from '06, and guys, I can't stop listening to it. Chances are I'm listening to it as I edit this video. It is seriously a fucking banger. Omens looks great, sounds great, performs well, and all of that is a win. But now for the real and most important question, does it play well? That question is definitely a loaded one, so I'll simply try my best to answer it. The objective of Omens is to try and bridge the gap between the 2000s era of Sonic with the Boost era, and that's made expressly clear story-wise. But surprisingly enough, that's also the case gameplay-wise. You see, while the controls and level design of Omens screams games like Adventure 1 and 2, Heroes, 06, the game does something crazy and implements a boost along with it. This spells out disaster. Taking the general freedom of older 3D titles and combining that with a boost format that relied on linearity and a heavier focus on reaction time sounds like it would not work. And yet, the devs put it off. Omens successfully combines the positive attributes of both eras into a seamless experience. What really turns people off from the boost games is the boost is basically your run button. There's no sense of natural speed and the levels more often play themselves. Omens fixes that by having the boost simply serve as a rewarding enhancement. By collecting rings and filling your boost gauge, you gain the ability to greatly accelerate your speed and take specific shortcuts, but it doesn't come at the cost of removing any amount of control over Sonic. What allows for this to even be possible is the general openness of each stage. The level design for this game is absolutely flawless, and is possibly the best level design I've seen in any Sonic game ever made. I wish I was exaggerating, but no guys, it's fucking insane. There is no shortage of shortcuts and alternate paths in these stages, and they're big enough to encourage exploration as well as making boosting feel a lot more natural and controllable. But they're also linear enough to successfully emulate the high octane speed the series is known for, as well as not risk the player getting lost or confused about where to go. Tree Palace is the only exception to this. As I'm making this video, I'm still in awe that this game plays as well as it does, and the fact this is all fan-made cannot be understated. If you're wondering what abilities Sonic has, most of what you'd expect is present. There's the homing attack, which is super responsive, smooth, and thankfully has a lock-on indicator. There's the lightspeed dash, which works the same as it does in Adventure 2 and onward. It can very well come in handy. And surprisingly, Sonic has a spin dash. Unfortunately, it's completely useless, doesn't move you forward too much, and is completely trivialized by the boost. I wouldn't even have known about it if it wasn't for this kind commenter. But hey, at least it's here, right? A returning move that's done justice is the lightspeed attack. After you charge it up, Sonic will auto-lock onto all nearby enemies and destroy them within seconds. I initially thought there would be no utility in such a move since in a game that encourages me to go fast, stopping in my tracks to destroy some mildly threatening egg pawns just seemed pointless in games like Adventure 1 and 2. Though it was slightly useful in Heroes, but only because there are some forced combat sequences in that game. Omens has its fair share of forced combat sequences to incentivize users of the move as well, but fortunately to a much lesser and more natural extent, and in those moments, the lightspeed attack came pretty handy. It's one of those things that you won't think much of as you progress through the game, but at the end of the day, you're still thankful for it being included. I should also mention Sonic has the bound jump which allows him to rebound off the ground to reach certain heights, and it feels immensely satisfying to use. A semi-new ability Sonic has is the Energy Whip, a beam of blue energy that can shoot from Chip's wristband, which I can only assume was directly inspired by the inner beam from Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric of all things. The Energy Whip allows Sonic to take certain shortcuts by swinging on nearby runes. Simply put, this is a sick new move that allows for some neat traversal and mobility. That pretty much does it for Sonic's moveset, and I think about now, my reasons for enjoying this game are clear. This isn't some proof of concept or unique experiment like other fan games. This is a fully realized 2022 3D Sonic game that carries over many attributes from past official titles and blends them together, which all accumulates in a vastly enjoyable experience. One that's held together with shockingly good level design. It's definitely not for everyone since the blend of so many different gameplay styles could potentially feel messy, but as a fan of adventure gameplay, boost gameplay, and the openness of the stages, I'm all game. But there's more to Sonic Omens than, well, Sonic. And that is the ultimate life form himself, Shadow the Hedgehog. That's right, alongside Sonic, Shadow is the second primary character in the game with unique stages tailored around his moveset. Yes, unlike literally every official game, Shadow isn't just a reskin of Sonic gameplay-wise. While yes, he does have the spin dash, homing attack, lightspeed dash, and boost, moves like the lightspeed attack, energy whip, and rebound jump are all completely inaccessible. In place of all of that are 4 chaos abilities, each with its own function. There's the Chaos Spear, which allows Shadow to launch a bolt of Chaos energy at a specified target. This is often used to activate switches, but it can also be used against enemies, and yeah, it's not as cool as it sounds. Not only is homing attacking way faster, but using Chaos Spears will burn through your Chaos meter pretty fast, and that's a huge waste when you could be using more efficient abilities. Case in point, Chaos Control. Easily the best fucking Chaos ability by a mile. As you might expect, this allows you to completely slow down time, and this can be used for multiple scenarios. If you need to avoid fast-moving obstacles, render enemies defenseless, or just feel like an overpowered badass, Chaos Control is your go-to. I cannot tell you how many times this move saved my life. Next is Chaos Dash, which is self-explanatory. It enables Shadow to dash in whichever direction, which is often used to shake up the platforming of the level, and yeah, it's fine. It can be a little awkward figuring out how to dash upwards though. And finally, there's Chaos Blast, a move that, in an instant, clears every nearby threat in your surrounding radius. Chaos Control is easily the most useful, but Chaos Blast is my personal favorite because, I mean, look at this shit. I'm Shadow the motherfucking Hedgehog obliterating crowds of egg pawns in a single instance. What else could I ask for? Seriously though, I really want to commend the devs for not taking the easy route with a playable Shadow and actually going the extra mile to make him feel like a separate character from Sonic. They both play alike, but have enough differences to make both of them stand out. What's interesting is both of these characters can play each other's levels, and when I first realized this, I was filled with excitement. I thought this meant if I played Shadow Paradise as Shadow or United Railroad with Sonic, I'd be able to use each character's unique ability to find previously hidden and inaccessible shortcuts, and maybe be rewarded with red rings or score bonuses for doing so. But unfortunately, this wasn't the case, and playing a stage that the character wasn't designed for will make it significantly less fun, since Shadow can't energy whip on runes, and Sonic obviously can't use chaos abilities. Maybe I'm asking too much, especially considering how fucking incredible this game is already, but I thought I'd bring it up since I think it was a missed opportunity. While we're being critical, I guess it's time to talk about aspects of the game that players seem to not be so keen on, such as the tornado stages. At certain points in the game, you'll take control of Tails inside the tornado and have the task of piloting it through a hazardous area. Before I even say anything, I respect the hell out of our Ouroboros studio for even attempting an alternate gameplay style this ambitious. We've been able to fly the tornado in the official games, but only in on-rail segments. Here, however, the plane is fully in the player's control and you can freely navigate open terrain with little to no issue. One thing to keep in mind is that I played Omens on a more recent build, so I don't know how these levels played originally and if people's hatred for them is justified. But I can tell you that from my experience, they play just fine. The controls for the tornado are pretty smooth and the overall level design is solid for the most part. The two things you gotta watch out for are enemy aerial vehicles and terrain-based obstacles. The former of which you can shoot down using either conventional gunfire or rechargeable rockets that can come in handy for beefier threats. While Sonic and Shadow stages are all about speed, Tails is all about patience and timing. You're encouraged to move more carefully while simultaneously being aware of your surroundings, and it works. These levels are pretty calming and can act as a nice break from the main speed-based gameplay and offer some nice variety. These levels also aren't particularly difficult since the tornado has a health bar that can be replenished by collecting rings and destroying nearby health packs, which there are plenty of. If I had to think of any notable issues, the length of these stages comes to mind. On a first playthrough, they can definitely last quite a while, especially because there's backtracking and no waypoint to indicate where you need to go. Secondly, sometimes the collision can be a little whack. Just bumping into the tiniest thing can damage your plane and disorientate you in the process, which can sometimes get annoying. Both of these issues are only amplified in Weeping Rift. Other than that, however, I see no problem with these levels, and I think the community definitely overreacted a bit. Which is no surprise at this point. But even if you're not a fan of them, there are only 3 in the entire game, with one of them being a boss fight, so I think you're good. Speaking of which, the boss fights. Another element of this game the community despises, with most claiming they're way too difficult and poorly balanced. To no one's surprise, this is yet another instance where I have to question if I even played the same game as these people. Don't get me wrong, the boss fights here are certainly no cakewalk and definitely have some challenge to them. But do you want to know why that is? Because these boss fights play like boss fights. Each of the bosses have patterns of attack that the player has to learn and exploit in order to stay alive until an opening presents itself. Not only is this process extremely fun, but it gives these fights a lot of depth and makes them more than just an enemy spawn for you to attack repeatedly. Also, regarding difficulty, I'm at a loss here. I got my ass handed to me on some of these encounters, but once I actually figured out what I was supposed to do, I cleared most of these fights with next to no trouble. They are not that hard. I hate to be that guy, but if people find these fights so hard they're unplayable, it might just be a skill issue. I'm not even that great at Sonic games, but aside from the final boss, none of these fights really took me more than 3 attempts to finish. I guess most Sonic fans could be used to the laughably easy bosses in the official games, and that's why they have trouble here, but if that's the case, then they need to expand their game catalog because, good lord. Now that we've covered basically every major gameplay element, I want to take some time to go over each individual stage, since I have some thoughts I want to share about each of them, but don't worry, I'll be brief. Probably. Starting off with episode 1, The Breakthrough, is Wellspring, which does its job nicely as a tutorial level. I cannot tell you how many times I've played a game that has a banger opening level, but it gets ruined because I get bombarded with pop-ups telling me how to move the analog stick, or that I need to press X to jump. So having a slow stage dedicated to teaching newcomers how to play was a smart move. That way, once we get to Chao Paradise, it's full speed ahead. I love this level. Not only does it look gorgeous, but it's just so much fun. It still teaches you a few of the basics such as the light speed attack and energy whip move, but aside from that, Chao Paradise is basically the green hill of this game. It's a fun, fast-paced playground that makes use of all the game's mechanics to let you know what you're in for. I also love how effectively water is used here. Similar to Unleashed, if Sonic is moving at a fast enough speed or in the process of boosting, he'll be able to run on water. If not, he'll simply sink to the bottom and you'll have to maneuver through your typical underwater Sonic section until you get back up. I love this design choice. Like the classic games, it highly incentivizes the player to maintain a certain speed and punishes them for failing to do so of a harder, more inconvenient route. And Chao Paradise makes good use of this mechanic and has its fair share of alternate routes and pathways. It's a fun time. After that is the first boss in the game, Dragoon E0. Yes, this robot is a rusted, abandoned prototype of the Egg Dragoon from Unleashed, and I for one think that's cool. Stuff like this makes the world of Sonic feel much more realized. Anyways, the fight is just fine. Like most in the game, it's all about timing, with the mech's core only being exposed for a brief moment after each attack sequence. It's a fun challenge and does a good job of introducing how the bosses will play going forward. That concludes episode 1, and episode 2, Temple of Sand, kicks off with Area 99. If that name sounds familiar, yes, it's a direct reference to Area 99 from episode 2 of Sonic X, and have I mentioned I love this game yet? Anyways, this stage is much more fast-paced and action-oriented than Chao Paradise, and I love it for that. It's more linear, but it makes up for that with really good level design. After that is the first tornado level, Wild Ridge. I already went over how these stages play earlier, so I'm not going to go too in-depth here. It's a fine level that adds variety and encourages patience and careful handling. The next stage is Escaping the Knoll, which is another tornado level but with a twist. The first half has Sonic and Tails trying to escape a giant serpent-like monster. This part of the stage is pretty adrenaline-inducing, and I like how the monster's gigantic body will move and act as obstacles you have to dodge and weave from. The second half is the boss fight against Knoll itself, and the tornado handles surprisingly well here. Like most fights, you just have to wait and predict Knoll's attacks until he exposes his weakness for you to shoot. I know, this game might as well be Dark Souls. Episode 3, White Jungle, starts off with a returning stage actually. I bet you can guess what it is. White Jungle from Sonic Adventure 2, except this time it has a cool new storming aesthetic. It plays just fine, but similar to Generations, it feels great to replay an older stage with this new boost gameplay. Next is Tree Palace, which is super unique in design, for better or for worse. Instead of running forward to reach the end goal, you're finding ways to ascend this ginormous tree. Platforming is really emphasized here, and it's a lot more slower paced than traditional speed stages. Imagine climbing the Ray Island Towers from Sonic Frontiers, but with alternate routes, and that's basically what Tree Palace is as a stage. I love the concept, but I think Tree Palace is just a little too slow paced for me, to the point where it can get boring and kinda kill the pacing of the game. It's not awful by any means, but it's definitely one of the less enjoyable levels. This big Easter egg is really cool though. The next stage is Waterfall Chase, which has Sonic trying to outrun a flooding water current. What makes this level pretty unique is it kind of acts as a speed section from 06, except, you know, they don't play like garbage. The goal here is to run as fast as humanly possible to avoid instant death, and despite the stage's short length, it still makes an impression of the spectacle of the tree rapidly flooding as you run. Gun Arsenal kicks off episode 4, Shadow of Water, and serves as Shadow's tutorial level. It's a fine level, and I like the red and black color scheme, but design-wise it's a little too linear for my taste, and it doesn't have much going on. However, I do think the music here kicks ass, and this fun Easter egg where you can find Vector hanging out in the computer room is just awesome. It's stuff like this where you can see just how passionate these devs were about Sonic. Moldy Jungle comes after, and like Gun Arsenal, it's fine. I think the scenery is cool, and Shadow's chaos abilities are required for some neat bits of platforming, but overall, it's mostly uninteresting to go back and replay. Concluding episode 4 is a boss against the Vortex, another chaos monster. What makes this fight stand out is that instead of waiting for the boss to expose its weak point, it's instead always available for you to damage. However, it's your responsibility to watch out for the Vortex's attack and observe his animation so you can predict an incoming move. This makes the Vortex a way more fast-paced fight than the others, and making use of Shadow's Chaos abilities here to get some easy hits in makes it all the more exciting. Once his health reaches halfway, the boss will disappear and Shadow will have to make his escape from the underground structure as water begins flooding in. This initiates a fucking awesome set piece where he's speeding towards the exit as the Vortex tries to grab you from the walls, leading all the way up to Phase 2. Both parties are done playing games, and the amazing track and highlight of the OST, Rise Out, is blasting at full gear. The sheer scope and design of this battle makes it one of the most memorable moments of the game, and Shadow taking off his inhibitor rings to completely annihilate the monster is the last cherry on top, and a perfect way to close out Episode 4. Episode 5, The Exiled, is playing no games, since it opens up with easily the best stage in the entire game, United Railroad. I fucking adore this level so much, and it's easily one of the biggest highlights of this entire experience. United Railroad is a behemoth of a level that usually goes on for 10 or 12 minutes in your first run, and in that time, it will throw awesome platforming section after awesome platforming section at the player with no mercy. Not only is speed greatly emphasized here, but this stage was constructed entirely for you to make the absolute most of your chaos abilities. There are so many sections that can be tackled in a different way depending on which abilities you choose to utilize at the moment, making it so much fun to revisit. And if things couldn't get better, it ends on a train sequence where Shadow is attempting to apprehend Eggman before Sonic does. Once you board the train, there are compartments full of egg pawns that's dropping containers you gotta watch out for, and on the roof, your reaction time will be tested by oncoming signs and billboards that can be sidestepped or slid under. And all ends with a flawless, sexy-ass cutscene transition of Shadow and Sonic making eye contact before the train is derailed by Eggman's giant robot. I love this stage so much, and to me, it is peak Sonic level design. Episode 5 is definitely one of the shorter episodes because right after that is the concluding boss, the Metal Ember. Finally, a one-on-one fight between Sonic and Eggman. This battle is so much fun. The fact that it's on rails and you have to wait for an opening might make you think this is just another Colors, Lost World or Force's final Eggman fight, but don't worry, it's not. First off, the movement here is much more free instead of being chopped up to 3 lanes, and second off, the Metal Ember has some really cool attacks. It can shoot missiles, it can shoot out giant balls of energy, and it has a motherfucking laser beam. The player has to be on their toes here since their reaction time has to be basically flawless. It's not just the fight itself that's cool, but also just the spectacle of Sonic chasing Eggman as he destroys parts of the city in his crazed attempt to exterminate the Hedgehog is nuts, and I love it. There are also a lot of Sonic X Easter eggs and references around the city which I greatly appreciate. Yeah, like you should expect by now, the Metal Ember is a kick-ass fight that does a great job closing Episode 5. Episode 6, Worlds Colliding, starts off with the final tornado level, Weeping Rift, which is definitely the least enjoyable stage in the entire game. It's not bad necessarily, but my problem with it is that it just goes on forever. It can be quite difficult to navigate due to the deadly springs and enemy robots that can take your plane down. When you combine that with the length, yeah, I was pretty miserable playing this for the first time. What saves it is the hauntingly beautiful atmosphere and somber, chilling music on display here. Very fitting considering the newly discovered stakes in the story at this point in the game. I also like the final semi-chase sequence with Ember towards the end. After that is Shadow's final level and boss fight of the game, Maria. Yeah, the story gets crazy here, so don't ask questions and just roll with it for now. This fight is simultaneously the hardest one in the game, and yet the easiest. There is so much shit on screen that makes it insanely difficult to avoid getting hit, and this battle is pure chaos. And yet, I've never died to it and always achieve an S rank without even trying. Weird. Maybe I'm just built different. The last speed stage of the game in the conclusion of Episode 6 is the Citadel of Lotus. This stage acts as any Final Sonic stage should. It is long, unpredictable, and pretty damn difficult. Seriously, on my first attempt playing this level, I wanted to break something. I don't even know how to describe it. There are like a gazillion amount of intense platforming sections, your reaction time needs to be nothing short of flawless, and the enemies here want you dead, with a capital D. It can be very frustrating playing through this for the first time, but once you get used to it, I think the Citadel of Lotus can be a really fun time. Just go in prepared if you check this game out. Finally, we've made it to the end. Episode 7, The Last Omen. This episode is only comprised of one boss fight, the Exiled, who serves as the final boss in the game. Let me tell you, our Ouroboros studio certainly saved the best for last. This fight acts as a traditional final Supersonic fight, but with a twist. Sonic doesn't have his super form available 24/7, at least in the first phase, and the Exiled is strong enough to strike Sonic out of it. So what you have to do is use your natural speed to fill your boost gauge until you can do a Chaos Blast which will change you super and stun the Exiled. You then have a very brief window of opportunity to inflict some free damage before you have to regain your super form. I love this for so many reasons. First of all, the challenge here is really unique. See, you can use your boost, and doing so would make dodging incoming attacks much easier, but doing so delays the opportunity for a Chaos Blast, so the player has to think critically about when it's wise to use the boost, if at all, which adds so much depth to the battle. Secondly, there are multiple ways to fill your boost gauge. One is by running into these weird bubbles around the arena, and the other is by attacking the Exile's forces when they drop down to assist their master. This provides plenty of opportunities for you to earn some boost, but this makes it easy to forget that there's a Dark Souls knight wielding a Sly Cooper cane who wants you dead. So again, this presents another choice the player has to consciously make throughout the fight. Should you worry about dodging the Exile so you don't lose any boost or rings, or should you solely focus on filling your gauge as fast as humanly possible? This first phase is so brilliantly designed, and it can prove to be a big challenge on your first playthrough. After completion of the first phase, you transition to the second and perhaps the coolest cutscene I've ever seen in a Sonic game. How does this game even exist? In the second phase, you have your super form permanently, but you still need your Chaos Blast to stun the Exiled, and his attack can make you lose rings, rendering you still vulnerable. So you have to use Sonic's greatest weapon, his speed, in order to fill the boost gauge and earn a window for attack. All while this is happening, all of the Omens of Chaos are gathered around to witness this epic battle, and the weight of the world is blasting at full volume. This is how you cap off a game. Now that I've covered each stage, it's time to delve into the replayability Omens offers. Because yes, even though this is a fan game of 18 stages, alternate gameplay styles, and entire boss fights, our Ouroboros Studio still found time to give players an incentive to go back and replay levels. What a bunch of legends. Just like the official games, most stages in Omens contain a set of 5 red rings for the players to find and collect. This usually encourages exploration and replayability in most modern games, and here it's no different. Well, except for one thing. These red rings are hidden really well. You won't find all of them by playing through a level normally and just keeping your eyes open. No, if you want to collect these red rings, you'll be going out of your way to find them. And in the process, you'll discover just how many alternate and secret pathways these stages contain because my goodness. Collecting all of the red rings in a stage will unlock background lore for each location you visit, and these will often add to the world building of this universe and clarify elements of the main story that wasn't thoroughly fleshed out. This is a cool reward. However, if you collect all 65 red rings in the game, you unlock one piece of the story, and yeah, I won't get into it now, but it's definitely not the upbeat and triumphant reward I expected for all of my hard work. Another reason to go back and replay Omens is the ranking system. Upon completing stages, the player will be ranked with a letter grade based on their performance just like in official titles. I went out of my way to obtain every S rank in this game, and unfortunately, there wasn't much reason for me to do so. Unlike the red rings, you won't get anything for getting S ranks. And you know what, I wouldn't care all that much of the actual process of getting S ranks for fun, but they aren't. And that's because the ranking system is primarily score based instead of time based. Something that started with Adventure 2 and carried all the way to Forces. In this model, an impressive time on a level isn't enough to get a good ranking. The player has to resort to other ways of earning scores such as having a massive ring bonus and destroying as many enemies as possible. This makes the process of earning a perfect rank super boring since you're not necessarily doing anything noteworthy or impressive. You're just going through a level as slowly as possible, trying not to miss any rings or any potential enemies. Generations was the game to finally fix this problem in a rather pretty clever way. A lot of score is still needed in order to get a good ranking, but this time around, your time bonus is what's really imperative to earn that score, making S ranks all about speed, which is appropriate for a Sonic game. Unfortunately, in Omen's case, time bonuses aren't as important, and they have the same problem as older titles. Instead of beating a stage as fast as possible in order to earn a perfect rank, you instead have to slowly progress through a level and make sure you don't miss anything that could contribute to your score, making this process slow and tedious. I know it's not that big of a deal since there's no reason to go for S ranks in the first place, but still, it's something worth pointing out. If this game receives any more updates, I'd love to see one that not only makes S ranks mainly time-based, but also provides some sort of reward for getting all of them. Speaking of updates, right after I finished everything I wanted to do in Omens and began work on this review, the game had its 3-year anniversary. And to celebrate that, our Ouroboros studio put out a 3.2.0 update that added some new Game Plus content. First off, it added Super Sonic into the base game, allowing the player to use him whenever they feel like it. This, as you probably expect, is a hell of a lot of fun. And Shadow got a little something as well. It's not major, but his Chaos build was updated so that it auto-locks into enemies without requiring precise aiming. This makes using the ability much more convenient and fun to use. That's pretty much it with everything regarding this update aside from bug fixes, and I commend the devs for implementing Super Sonic into every speed stage, and I'm glad this wonderful game is still getting frequent updates despite all the negativity surrounding it. I think we have everything gameplay wise covered. With all that out of the way, it's time to delve into one giant aspect of Omens that I was genuinely surprised by. The story. On top of fully realized stages, cutscenes, visuals, and gameplay styles, this game decided it already wasn't crazy enough, and it has a surprisingly really imaginative narrative that draws inspiration from other Sonic media to tell a fully original and compelling story. Before I ramble on about it, know that I won't hold back on spoilers, and if you couldn't tell yet, I think Omen's story is one that should be experienced blind since it's a really fun, wild, and creative ride. If you want to experience the story yourself, or you're simply uninterested in seeing me talk about it, this video is segmented into chapters, so simply skip to the next one and we can start wrapping things up. For those of you who are sticking around though, let's begin. The game opens with a panning shot showcasing a bunch of relics and items from Sonic's past adventures until we see the Hedgehog himself relaxing in the attic of Tails' workshop. Tails barges in with a radio and turns on an ongoing news report that's talking about a recent theft of a Chaos Emerald by none other than Dr. Eggman. I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but the voice in the video sounds pretty similar to the news anchor from Sonic X, and this was done intentionally. That's pretty awesome.
Professor Robotnik, also known as Eggman, captured the Chaos Emerald. Again. Eyewitnesses at the site report that construction machinery seemed to malfunction whenever it came within close contact of this strange jewel.
Hearing the news, Sonic is of course enthusiastic to follow yet another scheme from Robotnik, and Tails has a lead due to some strange activity from a nearby abandoned Eggman outpost. This kicks off the main plot, but before we move forward, there are some things we need to discuss, such as when the story even takes place in the timeline. Like I mentioned earlier, Omens is a continuation of Sonic X, but not a direct one, since this story takes place about 2 decades after the events of the Meta X arc. If you're wondering how Sonic is in the same world as humans when in Sonic X, he and his friends had to go to their home world to avoid the freezing of time, it's actually explained in a pretty interesting way. After being sent back to his dimension by Eggman, Chris Thorndike was able to find a way to not only unify Earth and Mobius, but utilize the energy of chaos to stabilize the synchronization of both dimensions so time doesn't come to a complete standstill. This event we're going to be referred to as the Unity of Worlds. At the time this game was being developed, Tails 2 wasn't a thing and hadn't yet provided us a solid answer behind if humans and animals existed in 2 separate worlds or were all in one landmass. So with that in mind, this is a pretty neat headcanon. During this gap in time after Unity of Worlds, the events of Unleashed took place, canonizing that game's story, making this all set right before Colors. However, due to conflicting continuities between the main games and Sonic X, I think it's safe to rule out the Advanced Trilogy, Heroes, Shadow the Hedgehog, and 06 as canon to this game's story. Now that we have a firm grasp on where we are in the timeline, we can more accurately judge how well these characters are translated in the story Omens is trying to tell. Sonic, to me, is a perfect blend of his X and game depictions. Just like in Sonic X, Sonic is pretty cheeky, likes to nap, and is pretty laid back but can very much get serious when the stakes are high enough. But here, he's not as impulsive as he is in the show and has more of modern game Sonic's level-headedness. For a story that's serving as a transition between the dark and meta era, this works really well. Tails is written perfectly here. He's still somewhat dependent on Sonic, but after all the experiences he's been through in Sonic X, this two-tailed fox is a beast when it comes down to it, and has a lot more independence and confidence here, which is really appropriate. I get his characterization might not match that of the meta era which this game is supposed to be setting up, but I mean, is anyone complaining? Back to the story, Tails gives Sonic a lift to Eggman's outpost, passing Knuckles is doing his usual routine of keeping an eye on the Master Emerald. On their way to the outpost though, they fly right into the airspace of gun drones that are presented as an ominous, terrifying force of nature, and I love it. Shadow the Hedgehog disappointingly degraded Gun into a generic militaristic agency which was continued in 06 until the main games just forgot they even existed. And don't get me started on how pathetic they were in Movie 2. Thankfully, Omens takes Gun back to that Adventure 2 roots of being an antagonistic, deadly, militarized force that no one but Eggman has the gong to fuck with. This is the same agency that slaughtered an entire research facility of innocent people to keep their dirty tracks clean. This is the same agency that demolished a city block just to capture one wrongly accused hedgehog. This is the same agency that chased Sonic and friends across an entire city with everything in their disposal to get the job done. Gun are not the good guys. They were never the good guys. And this game recognizes that and has it play to the story's strength. Sonic and Tails fall from the air, but Sonic doesn't hit the ground due to a strange energy bead coming from Chip's wristband that seems to have grabbed into a nearby rune. Yes, this game acknowledges Chip's wristband. Why is it so hard, Sega? The two heroes see that Eggman's robots are here at Paradise Island, so Tails goes to check on the Chow Gardens as Sonic makes a run for the old Eggman Tower. It's explained in the additional lore that this island used to be a peaceful place populated by Chow until Eggman invaded it and built a base here. He was driven out by Gun, and after this, a legal agreement was made with Sonic called the Mutual Protection Act, an agreement that places the Chaos Emeralds under Sonic's ownership and protection. The catch was that if Sonic would ever let them fall into Eggman's hands, ownership would be forfeit. This is a cool idea, but doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. You see, all 7 of the Chaos Emeralds are scattered across the globe, with some even being untouched as the Unity of Worlds, so how are they in anyone's ownership if no one has any idea where they are? And furthermore, shouldn't it be Sonic's responsibility to collect all 7 and store them someplace under his watchful eye? Or hell, just give them the Knuckles. Protecting the emeralds seems right up his alley if anyone was going to do it. Anyway, the two arrive at Eggman's wrecked outpost and Tails begin accessing the computer for any useful information when he trips the security system, triggering an Egg Dragoon prototype to be deployed. Sonic unsurprisingly makes quick work of it, and from the robot, Sonic obtains data that's able to track Eggman's location. Why Eggman would put something like that in his death robot that's meant to kill anyone who's trying to look for him, I do not know. But what's important is that Sonic and Tails know he's headed for the Grand Canyon, so that's where they take off. It's also worth noting that the Master Emerald is acting pretty strange, preventing Sonic and Tails from communicating with Knuckles. And that, along with Chip's wristband acting strange all of a sudden, is all proving something odd is going on here. If there's one thing I've missed in Sonic stories, it's mysteries, and Frontiers thankfully delivered on that front, but it's also really refreshing seeing it here as well. Our heroes track Eggman all the way to Area 99, which despite the name, oddly isn't the exact same Area 99 from the show. This was a research facility created by Chris Thorndike after he climbed the ranks and became the head of Gun. I know that sounds really dumb, but when you take into account how brilliant of a scientist Chris is, and how much experience he's had with world-ending threats, yeah, I couldn't think of anyone better suited for the position. Under his leadership, the agency was able to be reformed for a short period. Because they weren't invited, Sonic and Tails had to do this the hard way, and they break into the facility to cut across it and fly into the Wild Ridge, a treacherous canyon that has the entrance to an old temple that, according to the game, houses the Master Emerald. What? I have to think this is a typo and the devs meant to say Chaos Emerald because the Master Emerald has always been kept on Angel Island. It's even what keeps the whole thing in the sky. So I have no idea at what point could this have been the original holding place of the Master Emerald. Tails is able to pilot through the harsh valley, but upon entering the temple, he notices strange markings on the ancient walls that illustrate strange, ominous creatures. They make it right on time to see Eggman stealing an emerald, which is further evidence that the whole Master Emerald thing was a typo, when a giant creature comes out of nowhere, yeets Eggman's ass into a wall, and gives chase to Sonic and Tails. They're able to outrun and seemingly destroy the monster, retrieving the red emerald from it. They continue after Eggman. Meanwhile, a strange, ominous figure lurks beneath the surface, mentioning Thorndike and referring to the creature as the first Omen. So the plot thickens. Real quick, I love Sonic stories like these. Having the story bait you into a typical Sonic vs. Eggman plot only to turn out to be a grand, larger in scope narrative is, in my opinion, the perfect structure of a Sonic story. I know there are some who like it when things are a lot simpler and it's just Eggman as the main threat, but there are only so many times that formula can work before it starts to get a little stale after a while. To me, Eggman works best as a recurring, familiar threat that serves to get the story going until the stakes get bigger and a new threat is introduced. That's why I love the dark era of Sonic storytelling so much. Sonic and Tails continue chasing Eggman to the White Jungle when, for some reason, the nearby gun robots start attacking the pair only. Sonic hops out of the tornado to distract them and the two split up. Like I mentioned earlier, this is the same White Jungle from Adventure 2, and apparently it was able to recover from the Prison Island explosion. Sure. It's also mentioned the jungle was the base of operations for a gang of jackals until they were driven out by Gun, which could be a reference to the Jackal Squad of mercenaries from the Sonic Forces prequel comic. If so, that's a pretty neat Easter egg. Sonic eventually makes it to the Hello-Sand Tree, which is a pretty brutal climb normally, hence its name. But Sonic, being Sonic, makes it up there no sweat and retrieves the emerald here that's lie dormant ever since the Unity of the Worlds. Taking it results in a massive flood that quickly begins engulfing the tree, and Sonic is barely able to escape and make it back onto the tornado, with Tails saving his life. The two friends rejoice in their victory until the emeralds being in close contact emit a bright beacon, just like in the show, that gives them away to everyone nearby, and the tornado is shot down. We then change perspective from Sonic's story to, you guessed it, the ultimate lifeform himself, Shadow the Hedgehog. In Sonic X, the Mirror X arc concluded with Shadow being lost somewhere in space, but it's revealed that after the Unity of Worlds, Chris, along with his assistant, were able to find him and bring him back to Earth. With that cleared up, it's time to have a conversation that, to be honest, I'm pretty tired of having. Shadow's characterization. When Shadow is written accurately and well, he is easily my favorite character in the series. But that's the problem. 06 was the last thing to get his character right, and after that game, the dark brooding hero of a tragic past but a good heart was downgraded to a soulless, edgy Vegeta wannabe. In here, despite a clear attempt to make his character interesting, I feel the writing team just leans a little too far into the edge. Shadow, in this game, isn't a good person or even all that likable. Sure, he looks cool and does some badass shit in this game and even has some cool lines, but aside from the aesthetic of the character, there's not much here. And I get it. This isn't Game Shadow, this is Sonic X Shadow. During the Meta X arc, much like the games, Shadow had lost all of his memories and was basically a blank slate character who's prepared to kill a defenseless girl if it meant doing some objective good. And yeah, no one's arguing that Shadow was a saint, but at the same time, it was still clear he was obviously a good person. Molly's death in the show shook Shadow to his core, and because of it, he immediately avenged her and still honors her grave. Someone he had barely met but still greatly admired and respected because of her good heart and bravery. Or in the final battle, when Sonic is about to save all of his friends of Chaos Control which would have surely killed him, Shadow stepped in and sent him falling, deciding to do it himself since Sonic's death would be guaranteed and his Chaos powers are much more refined, knowing full well the risk. Even during his first appearance in the arc, he instinctively saves Chris without knowing who he is, what's going on, and having no recollection of his memories. Kind of like in Heroes when he instinctively saves Rouge after being reawakened. All those instances go to show you that Shadow the Hedgehog, above all else, is a hero. Sure, he's a no-nonsense person, but he cares. And I just do not get that impression of the Shadow I see in this game, unfortunately. It's also revealed that Shadow still wants to honor the promise he made to Maria, which is why he decided to work for Gun, and this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. A common misconception about the character is that he still cares about Maria and wants to do right by her promise, but this is just not the case at all. In Shadow the Hedgehog 05, the whole point of that game was for Shadow to strive to understand who he is, until he realizes that ultimately he shouldn't be bound by his past anymore, that his destiny should be determined by him alone. That game ends with him saying goodbye to the Shadow the Hedgehog of the past, the one who died at Adventure 2, and becoming his own person. That's the reason he works with Gun in 06 as a way of showing that Shadow's past is now completely irrelevant, so he holds no ill will towards Gun and decides to work with them, and that's what's going to allow him to do the most good. I get that's Game Shadow and not this one, but I think the same thing applies to X Shadow, who doesn't even remember Maria at all, and isn't really too concerned about remembering who he was. So him joining Gun because of Maria is a little odd and doesn't really add up. I know those of you who watch this channel regularly are sick and tired of my Shadow rants, but I can't help it. This character is so fucking cool and is my favorite in the series, but almost anyone who writes him fails to have any sort of understanding of what made the character so compelling in the first place. If you want to see Shadow written perfectly in a recent Sonic project, go check out episode 6 of Sonic and Tails R, which brings back Jason Griffith to reprise his role. His characterization in that show has the same Maria misconception, but other than that, it's pinpoint accurate on how the Ultimate Lifeform would behave and act on his colleagues. With that dumb rant finally over, let's get back to the plot of Omens, shall we? We flash back to Shadow completing a personalized training simulation before he makes it to a meeting with the heads of Gun, who are pissed with Sonic due to this whole mess of the Chaos Emeralds. They order Shadow to go retrieve them, and it's here where we find out that Gun are working with the same mysterious figure we saw back in episode 2. This guy is called the Exiled, and is confirmed to have been Chris's assistant during his time as head of Gun, but not much else is known about him. Though it is hinted that he and Shadow may have made a deal of sorts. Switching back to the present, Shadow rides through the now flooded jungle filled with poisonous quicksand and egg ponds as he's briefed by Rouge on the situation. Quick side note, I will say this. The writers nailed the friendship between Shadow and Rouge. Nowadays, in the games and especially the comics, these two are treated as simple acquaintances when that is not at all the case, so it was nice seeing that corrected here. Also, while this cutscene is going on, Shadow decides it's time to earn 100 additional badass points.
Shadow, are you listening to me?
Show off. Shadow makes it through the jungle and into the Tree Palace Temple but discovers that the emerald is missing. Suddenly, the floor beneath him collapses and he falls deep into the temple, with his emerald falling down and awakening a new chaos monster. Despite it being some mysterious ancient being, it ain't got shit on the Ultimate Lifeform, who after taking off his inhibitor rings, obliterates it in an instant. Bad ass. Before he or Rouge can make sense of what's going on, Shadow sees Eggman making a fast getaway and quickly runs after him. We finally switch back to Sonic and Tails, and while they're both knocked out after the crash, Eggman steals both of their emeralds, now having a total of 3. Sonic comes to and is quick to check on Tails, but is interrupted when Shadow appears and mocks him for requiring help instead of being able to handle things alone. Kinda hypocritical, Shadow, considering you have an entire agency helping you out, but okay. Shadow informs Sonic on the situation and it's revealed here that the reason Sonic and Tails were being targeted earlier in the game instead of Eggman was because Gun's robots were too rusted to tell the two apart. Kind of an anticlimactic explanation since there was a lot of foreshadowing that something else was amiss, but it's not that big of a deal. Shortly after, the dialogue between these two get wildly confusing, so I'll just let it play out.
I can't get distracted from my mission.
Not so fast. Leave Eggman to me. I still owe him a butt kicking for what happened on the island.
Remind me, wasn't it Juan and your friend that stopped Eggman? When you could not.
That's because you knocked me off the island!
Well, maybe you should stop getting in my way.
On my first couple of playthroughs, this cutscene always confused the hell out of me because I had no idea what either of these two was talking about. They clearly weren't referencing Sonic X, so what was it? Then, as I was working on this video, I put two and two together and realized the island Sonic is referring to is Paradise Island from episode 1, and this whole conversation was basically just giving further insight to the events that transpired there and what led to the Mutual Protection Act. That took me a while to figure out, mostly because this cutscene relies on you having got all the red rings and knowing this information, but obviously on your first playthrough, this won't be the case. Regardless of how odd this dialogue may be the first time around, I still appreciate this game gave us a Sonic and Shadow fight, no matter how brief. It's interrupted when Tails shoots at Shadow, giving Sonic a head start after Eggman, before the tornado is quickly destroyed with a Chaos Spear. Now having two hedgehogs and the entirety of Gun on his ass, Eggman flees to a secret base he constructed at an abandoned railway, which previously connected continents until the regrowth of the Right Jungle overtook its largest depot. Shadow catches up with Sonic on Eggman's train, but as the two lock eyes, the mad genius emerges with a newly constructed robot and destroys the train. Before he comes to, Shadow has a sudden vision of Maria calling to him, which isn't the first time this has happened to him in the game, which even Shadow himself doesn't have an explanation for. Sonic speeds after Eggman, but before Shadow can continue his pursuit of the Chaos Emeralds, the Exile contacts him and mysteriously tells him to lay off and let Gun handle things. Now being fully cornered with nowhere else to go, Eggman powers his mech with the 3 Chaos Emeralds he's collected thus far to try and destroy his arch nemesis once and for all. Because in his words, this time he can't afford to lose. I adore the classic Sonic and Eggman exchanges during this boss fight. Sonic calling Eggman Robotnik and telling him to give up, Eggman claiming his machine to be invincible and howling like a madman. I love it. Just like how all these classic showdowns end, Sonic emerges victorious with Eggman lying in utter defeat next to his broken robot. Gun quickly catches up and apprehends the Doctor while also securing the Chaos Emeralds. Sonic argues against this, but a gun drone reminds him of the conditions of the Mutual Protection Act, and I don't know why he's so shocked here. It was your responsibility to protect the emeralds, and not only did Eggman get a hold of 3 of them, but you didn't even know where all of them were. As Eggman is being transported, something violent knocks everyone back, revealing the true nature of the figure you've seen lurking in the shadows. A Metarex. That's right, bitches. The main villain of this game is a Metarex who is in control of his own army and has been pulling the strings of the entire story. In Sonic X, the Metarex was some of the most intimidating and badass antagonists we've seen introduced in the franchise, so a continuation of that story in game form had to have these guys come back, and they most certainly do. Have I mentioned I love this game yet? The Exiled steals the 3 emeralds and strangely refers to Sonic as the controller of the light. With Gun outliving their usefulness to him, the Metarex has his troops make short work of their forces, and Shadow knocks Sonic unconscious, revealing he and the Exiled have been working together the whole time. More on this later. Sonic then has a dream sequence where we finally get our first glimpse of Chris Thorndike in the game, before he wakes up in an unfamiliar place with Tails at his side, and another unexpected ally, Dr. Eggman. He and Tails rescued Sonic from the urban city after he was knocked unconscious, and just like any good Sonic story, these 3 have to form a desperate alliance now that things have gotten serious. Thanks to Eggman, a lot more things start to become clear, such as Chris's full involvement of Gun and what the Exile's true intentions are. Chris was offered a way home to his family, but he was warned that a trip across dimensions could age or de-age his body to any extent. Well, this game has that slight ramification actually have consequences, with Chris being aged rapidly when he comes back to Earth and only having 15 years to live. In that time, he was able to become the head of Gun and reform the agency from the inside for it to be less one-to-one going forward. During his time as Gun Commander, it's unspecified when or how, but he met and befriended the Exiled, and the two formed a close partnership to change the world for the better. But after Chris's inevitable death, the new heads of Gun reverted the agency back to its destructive ways, and undid all of Chris's hard work, making the Exiled lose faith in humanity. Now that he successfully gathered all 7 of the Chaos Emeralds, the Exile was to use them to manipulate time and space, and the only way to generate enough energy is by easing the Emerald's destruction. Doing so, however, would completely erase the world of the present, killing everyone and everything. That explains the appearances of the Chaos monsters. Null, Vortex, and Ember are all the omens of chaos. Ancient beings have been reawakened by the disturbance in the balance of chaos and seek to protect the gems from any destructive forces. They weren't drawn to them out of power, they were drawn to them out of duty. Yeah, this is a lot to take in, but I gotta say, Omens goes up and beyond in delivering on the many questions that the story has presented. These are all really satisfying explanations that only adds to the imaginative world this game has constructed. You might think Chris befriending a Metarex and Gunn being completely okay with it is very far-fetched, but it actually makes sense in the context of the story. For one, Chris is a very compassionate and kind character in Sonic X. Yes, suck on it, Chris haters. So him welcoming an abandoned and pitiful Metarex with open arms is very much in character. And it's explained in additional lore info that Gunn did not treat the Exiled very kindly during Chris's time as commander, which is to be expected. After about 10 years or so, it's believable that Gunn would have at least slightly warmed up to him by now, or at least enough to work with the guy. In addition to all that information, there's also some added context to the story of Unleashed, since it specified that Eggman took advantage of the confusion stirred by Chris's death to try and awaken Dark Gaia, kicking off that game's events. Nothing to really say there, just thought that was neat. Also, I want to highlight how cool the destruction of the Emeralds is as a concept considering the goal of this game's story. Like I already mentioned, this game is serving as the neat transition we never had between the Dark and Meta era, and if you recall from all the 2010 stories, the Emeralds were never brought up at all except for Generations. But those Emeralds are presumably not the exact same ones since they came from different time periods. Omens sets out to explain why the Chaos Emeralds are not used anymore, which is pretty cool. And look, the game finished development on August 10th, 2022, a few months before the release of Sonic Frontier. Oh. Yikes. Okay, so maybe the timing could have been better, but A for effort. With the tornado being repaired, Sonic and Tails take off and make their way to the exiled Citadel. They regroup with Eggman, but before the three can reach the Citadel, Ember shows up, likely pissed he didn't get paid for having his likeness used for Eggman's robot, and takes the Doctor out of the air. Sonic and Tails blast full speed ahead. Meanwhile, Shadow watches from inside the fortress before a haunting image of Maria appears before him and attacks him. After a chaotic and confusing fight, the image of Maria dissipates and is revealed to be the Exiled who has now betrayed Shadow, and it's finally made clear the deal these two made. Remember those visions of Maria? Well, they've been going on for 2 years and have understandably been tormenting Shadow. At some point, the Exiled approached Shadow and offered to end those visions he's having, but only if Shadow aided his plans to betray Gunn and nab all the emeralds. But as we see in this cutscene, it actually turns out the Exiled was the one who's been creating all these visions, and this is his twisted way of honoring the deal he made. While this is a good way of making the Exiled stand out as an evil and badass villain, this simultaneously makes Shadow look like a fucking idiot. How did he not piece together that this guy was playing him for a fool? 1, he's a fucking Metarex. 2, he clearly has bad intentions considering his brutal betrayal of Gunn in his attack on the city earlier. And 3rd, how did he even know about the visions? I don't see that as something Shadow would confide in anyone about, except maybe Rouge, so the Exiled had to have been the one to inform Shadow of his knowledge of them, which would have immediately set off alarm bells. And did Shadow ever stop and think to ask how this Metarex even had the power to stop random visions? The Metarex are extremely powerful, but they don't have telepathic abilities, which brings up another question. How did the Exiled even cast these visions in the first place? It's explained he can use gun drones to create convincing holographic imagery, but that couldn't have been the case earlier since Shadow had his Maria visions in his head rather than seeing her pop up in real locations, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. Look, I do think this is a cool twist, but more details could have been fleshed out more. Obviously the Exiled didn't inform Shadow on his whole destroying the universe thing, and now enraged of being deceived, the angry Hedgehog takes off his inhibitor rings and the two clash. But as we see later, not even the ultimate lifeform's raw power could overcome the Exiled. While this is all going down, Sonic and Tails near the Citadel, and Sonic rides a missile into the fortress while Tails keeps Ember busy outside. Now in the heart of his operation, Sonic is able to make it to the grueling gauntlet of obstacles inside, getting banged up in the process. But as the Exiled exclaims, the Hedgehog is too late, since all of the emeralds are in place and the portal is in the process of activating. Meanwhile, Tails gets hit out of the air by Ember, but fortunately, the Omen sees the beacon of light and flies toward it. 6 of the emeralds shadow completely, but before the 7th one can, Sonic grabs it in the nick of time, but shortly after, he's immediately subdued by the Metarex, and the full mystery behind the Exiled is unveiled. Just like all Metarex, the Exiled was once under Dark Oak's command, but after he stood up against his plan to wipe out all life in the galaxy, the Exiled was, well, exiled from his Metarex brothers, and left in the Citadel to die where he became feral and undignified before Chris found and took pity on him. The Exiled was once a good person who genuinely wanted to help Chris make a brighter future, but after Gunn ruined all the changes he made, the Exiled was convinced humanity wasn't worth saving, and the only thing he wants to do after all of the wars and hardships he's been to is to use his portal in the destruction of chaos to travel back in time to his home. No matter the cost. No matter how many lives will be wiped out in the process. The Exiled is a fucking awesome villain, and this revelation is great. I find it a little hard to believe the Exiled would be allowed to live after standing up to Dark Oak, considering that man was a ruthless motherfucker, but this makes him a really compelling villain and neatly ties into the theme of Sonic X, appreciating the home you have. In Season 1 of the show, some of the Mobian characters were so dead set on finding their way back to the world, they couldn't initially appreciate the world and people around them until they were able to adjust and get comfortable. In Season 2, Sonic and friends had to go back home because of the time suspension phenomenon, and Chris learned to let go and appreciate the people in his life that he already had. In Season 3, Lucas could have escaped the life of war of his people and lived on a spaceship, but his intense desire to defend his home is what led to his people's destruction and his twisted transformation to Dark Oak. Home is a lot more than just a singular place, it's the people around you. This is the lesson that the Exiled unfortunately can't learn because of how he was treated. I just think that's so neat and works so well for an antagonist. As the Exiled goes on this evil monologue, Shadow appears, clearly exhausted and in no shape to fight, but he gets some much needed redemption when he launches the Chaos Spear, shattering the portal. It's here where the foreshadowing of Chip's wristband pays off, since because a part of Chip is in there, so too is the power of Light Gaia, which Sonic is able to use to turn super. This is what the Exiled meant by referring to him as the controller of the light. But there's a catch. Sonic can't maintain the form forever, so has to repeatedly gain enough energy to transform. Since destroying Sonic would likely result in more than enough energy to send him home, the two face off. This results in what I've already said is a spectacular final boss where in the midst of the battle, we get this amazing exchange.
This world is already proven unworthy. Your friend desired to change it, but his dreams died along with him. You too will not change anything.
Chris always was a dreamer, but he did change the world! Who are you to judge the world you gave up on?
Super Sonic and the Exiled continue going toe-to-toe, Sonic giving the Exiled every chance to stop and back down, but him ultimately refusing. After an intense, lengthy battle, the Exiled is ultimately defeated and mortally wounded.
So you were the last Omen.
I'm no Omen, or a controller of light. I'm just a guy that lives to the fullest with the time I have, with no regrets. I'm Sonic the Hedgehog!
I see. Sonic the Hedgehog. I am the last of my kind. My last hope was to flee into the past as far as possible. Not to save someone, not to change something, but to see my own land for the last time, at any cost. I am going back home.
Now that the Exile is defeated, Sonic takes off his wristband and ends the threat of chaos forever, dispelling the Omens and saving the day yet again.
I will never forget you. Remember?
Hey, Eggman! I have to ask.
What?
Remember when you said you tried to use the emeralds to travel back in time? What did you want to change?
Well, even someone like me has some regrets in life, Sonic. But let's leave that story for another time.
It's explained after the completion of the main story in the extras that the energy that binds both Sonic's world and the human world together is still theorized to remain unbroken. Oh, and by the way, you remember how I mentioned a reward for collecting all 65 red rings? Yeah, well what you get is the final unsent message from Chris Thorndike to Sonic where he references the Exiled and explains how he feels fine despite being called in critical condition by the doctors in the hospital he just escaped. He talks about feeling sleepy before he passes out on the keyboard, dying. Man, some fucking reward, am I right? Real talk, reading this message was just genuinely sad. In the final post-credit scene, we see that the End of Chaos did not exempt the Master Emerald, and so Knuckles goes on to live his own life, free of duty, which explains why he is never on Angel Island in any of the 2010 stories. We also see that Gun officially shuts down, which also explains why they're just filling their dicks in newer stories, even when Eggman took over the entire world. Tails received tickets to Eggman's new safe amusement park, which, as explained in the extras, is his way of showing he's now fully reformed and up to no misdeeds. This is of course setting up the events of Colors, which I greatly appreciate, even if it doesn't make too much sense considering Eggman was shocked to see Sonic and Tails at the theme park since they had snuck into it. And we end with one last shot of Sonic honoring Chris Thorndyke's grave before he hits the road once more. That was the story of Sonic Omens. Yeah, I would be the first to admit that it's messy. Really messy. There's a fair share of things that don't make too much sense, details that weren't fleshed out enough, slight contradictions in the source material, and the whole thing suffers from first draft syndrome. But despite its many issues, I still love the story of Omens. It's just so damn imaginative and creative. The many influences it pulls from other Sonic media all pay off. There's enough originality and emotion to truly take the whole thing seriously, and the fact that I just spent the last 28 or so minutes discussing the story of a fan game this in depth is crazy. The story writer, Alexander Zarkov, clearly didn't want to settle for a by-the-numbers narrative and want to tell a special, impactful story, and I commend him for succeeding in making the story of Omens one I certainly won't forget anytime soon. I think it's safe to say that I like this game. Seriously, this is an official game in all but name, and I genuinely cannot believe that it exists. With the entire game covered, we can finally delve into what is unfortunately the main subject of conversation surrounding this game, the dumb drama. If you bring up Omens to any Sonic fan, they'll immediately trash talk the game on instinct, and you're probably wondering why. What unforgivable sins were committed by the dev team to warrant such a huge stain on Omens' reputation? Well, if you're expecting something exciting, you're in for some disappointment. The biggest drama this game was involved with is the situation surrounding our Ouroboros Studios' Patreon. As many of you know, Sega is completely fine with fan-made games, so much as no profit is made out of them. Well, as a reward for becoming a Patreon member of our Ouroboros Studio, you'd receive access to a beta for Sonic Omens while the game was being developed. People did not like this one bit, and this is what started the entire, never-ending drama this game received. And look, I can understand why people were upset. If fangames started charging people money, Sega would probably ban the creation of fangames period, jeopardizing hundreds of passionate creations. But look, call me ignorant or whatever, but I see nothing wrong with this ethically. Games are fucking expensive to make, man, and this Patreon was made to not just fund the development of Omens, but also other future projects this dev team wanted to make. So I see nothing wrong with adding a harmless incentive to encourage future patrons. Also, other fan projects do this all the time and literally no one says anything about it. Where I really draw the line concerning this drama is everyone seemingly ignoring the fact that Sega has already looked into the development of Omens and everything surrounding it, and have already given the devs their approval. No, Sonic Omens is not endangering all fangames by existing. Everything has been sorted out, and this is no longer a valid reason to claim the Omens devs are bad people. What is a valid reason, or at least was initially, is the whole Maria ordeal. When Episode 7 first released, Maria Robotnik's model had something written on her undergarments. The text placed there said, "Bad girl." Maria Robotnik is 12 years old. Yeah, this is a huge yikes, and understandably, our Ouroboros studio had some explaining to do. Thankfully, they did just that, and it turns out that Maria's model was outsourced to someone else, and this person, believe it or not, did not do this with bad intentions. It turns out this person grew up with panties that had this "bad girl" label, and she added it in thinking it would be a cute Easter egg. I don't know how she did not anticipate this obviously being misinterpreted, but the "bad girl" text was fortunately removed in an update. So no, the devs are not pedos, guys, calm down. Now, what other unspeakable atrocities did this dev team commit? That's it. Yeah, no, aside from some smaller stuff, that's basically all of the major drama. Apparently, the original voice actor for Sonic got dropped because he needed to buy a new mic, but I don't find this troubling because there could have been some scheduling conflicts or behind-the-scenes conversations we don't know about. Oh, and people claim that the track for Area 99 uses stolen music from Cars 2 the video game, which is easily the funniest attempt I've seen so far to slam this game. The two tracks sound similar but aren't the exact same in the slightest. There's a doc that came out about our Ouroboros studio that the community ate up and used to justify their hate for Omens, but if you actually read the doc, it's full of a bunch of nothing information and easily disputed claims. If you want to know more about this information from someone who did their research, the Sonic Show's video will be linked in the description, so go check it out. But real quick, I just want to address how disappointed I am with the Sonic fandom regarding the situation behind this game. I have never seen anything receive as much forced hate as this one fan project, and it's an issue. Mostly because of how gung-ho and fast this community is to demonize someone over dumb reasoning and bad faith arguments. I hate to bring it up, especially since it's a recent issue and in the future when people are watching this video it won't be as relevant, but the Amy Jones drama is another clear instance of how toxic and fast this community is to dogpile on someone or something without hearing their side of the situation, and it's really frustrating. In an ideal world, the release of Omens would have shaken the community for an entirely different reason. The clear ambition, size, and scope of this marvelous project deserves better, and I feel really bad that all the hard work these devs put into Omens will go unrecognized because of an unjustified hate train. I don't know what drove you to watch a 1-hour video of a Sonic fan freaking out over a fan game, but if you take one thing away from this, do your research. Actually access things with an open mind and engage in more nuanced discussions. The world isn't black and white, and neither is one person. The hate Omens got is disgusting, and till this day, you'll see people calling this game utter trash because that's the opinion they've adopted from their favorite YouTuber, and it's sad. Don't let anyone tell you you can't enjoy Omens. That applies to anything you have a strong passion for. Just be kind and respect others. Well, we've reached the end. I love Sonic Omens. The amount of passion, talent, and endless creativity that went into this game is mind-blowing. Its presentation is immaculate, its gameplay is fun, the level design is amazing, the story is fun and imaginative. This game is one of the best Sonic experiences I've ever had. It's not a perfect Sonic game, nor a perfect game for that matter, but it's my perfect Sonic game. Everything I want out of this series is here. A high-stakes, emotional, epic story with loads of genuine world building, open levels of high-speed platforming action, an OST that I could listen to for hours, beautiful art direction. If this production had the budget and manpower of a AAA studio, this would easily, without a doubt in my mind, be my favorite Sonic game of all time. And none of that is mentioning this is a fan-made free-to-play project. I cannot fathom just how much passion and dedication went into crafting this experience, and it's one I'll cherish for many years to come. If you have a PC or gaming laptop that can run Omens, the link to this game will be in the description of this video. Download it and give it a fair shake. Odds are you won't be disappointed. We do not deserve a game like Sonic Omens. Alexei Bolt Dmitriev deserves to be proud of what he made, and I'm grateful I got the chance to experience it and share that love with you guys. Please like, subscribe, and as always, I will see you guys next time. Peace out.